A long time ago, I lived with my boyfriend at the time. He was really kind and gentle and always carried a small paperback poetry book in his pocket. He was someone who made me feel really safe. But you know, when you live with someone for a long time, cracks start to appear and you see parts of them you never knew existed. I'm sure all of you who have lived with your significant other have experienced this. The things I noticed in him were a little out of the ordinary. For example, one day we were playing around and as a joke, I pulled out the string from a hoodie and proceeded to try to tie a ribbon in his hair with it. He then snapped around and in a swift move tied my hands together tightly behind my back and said, "I'm going to tie up naughty girls like you," while grinning down at me. I hit him lightly while laughing and told him to stop it. He let me go and apologized. But that grin and the tone of his voice was something I'd never seen before and it freaked me out. I started to wonder if he had that kind of fetish. Not long after that, he suddenly went missing. There were no phone calls or letters and I had no idea why. Then one day I got a call. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it. It was an older woman and she asked, "Where's my daughter?" Apparently, her daughter had been missing for a while and while searching her room for some clues, found a crumpled piece of paper with my phone number in the bin. She asked for me by my last name, which was already strange in itself. I told her she had the right person, but that I didn't know her daughter at all. I then thought of my boyfriend and wondered if he was cheating on me and had run off with her, so I told the mother as much. The conversation left me feeling suspicious and extremely unsettled. Why did he give this girl my phone number and use my last name? I had so many questions, but I had to go to work, so I pushed it to the back of my mind. A few days later, I received another call. This time, it was a man. He asked whether my boyfriend was home. I told him he wasn't and that he hadn't actually come home for a while. The man then asked me details about the day and time he disappeared. After hanging up, my anxiety had peaked again. I had a bad feeling that something untoward was happening, so I decided to go through some of his things. I looked in the closet, under the futon, in the drawers. I didn't find anything and felt relieved. All of his clothes were still in the closet. I was on the verge of tears and hugged his jacket close. And that's when I noticed it. There was a black cloth bag hidden in the back corner of the closet. I tried to push all bad thoughts away as I grabbed it and opened it. Inside were handcuffs and a knife. It completely shook me up, so I immediately called a friend, crying, and she let me stay at her place for a few days. Once the shock settled, I was then overwhelmed by fear. What was he doing using my last name? What was he planning to do with those handcuffs and knife? Who the hell was he? I told my friend all the details. She told me to get out of there, so I packed up all my things, changed my phone number, and fled the apartment. I couldn't exactly switch my job as easily, so I continued working there. 6 months later, as I was walking out of my office, there was a man waiting for me in the lobby. He told me he was my ex-boyfriend's friend and that my boyfriend was in police custody. Apparently, my ex had asked his friend to seek me out and tell me to wait for him. The only things that were running through my head were, what did he do? Why was he in police custody? But more than that, I was terrified of him knowing where I was, so I quit my job that day by explaining the situation to my manager and made sure none of my personal information would be leaked. To this day, I still question who he was and what he was getting up to behind my back. I get chills just thinking about it, and I just hope he hasn't hurt anybody. There are some sensitive subjects in this story which may be triggering for some people. Viewer discretion is advised. Nobody believes me when I tell this story, but since this is the occult board, I'll give it a try. If you don't like long stories, feel free to skip this one. This happened about 10 years ago when I was a student. I met a woman 2 years older than me at the bar where I worked part-time. Let's call her Yuki. Now, I'm just as much of a loser as you all, but back then, I was just a regular student. Yuki and I clicked somehow and we started dating. Since I was living alone in an apartment after moving from the countryside, she would come over to my house about once or twice a week after work. We'd hang out, drink, and chat about all sorts of things. She was also from the countryside and said she lived with her younger sister. I was young and I was still kind of a jerk, and one day Yuki came to me and told me she was pregnant. We obviously couldn't have the baby, so after discussing it, we decided to have an abortion. After that, things became awkward between us and we broke up. At that point, we had only been together for about 9 months. Yuki depended on that part-time job to support herself, so she couldn't quit, but I ended up quitting, partly out of guilt, and I also moved out of my apartment and changed my phone number. I erased all traces of her and decided to start over. Thinking back now, I guess I still had feelings for her, and it was easiest to completely cut her out of my life. 5 or 6 years went by when one day a woman suddenly showed up at my apartment. I have no idea how she found me, but she introduced herself as Yuki's younger sister. I couldn't think of anything creepier. I had completely cut ties with everyone from that part-time job, so there was no way she could have found out my new address. She came to inform me that her sister, Yuki, had died. I didn't ask how, whether it was illness, an accident, or suicide, and she didn't elaborate. Of course, she didn't blame me for it, and it would have been ridiculous if she had. We both agreed to the breakup, and it had been years since we parted ways. She then asked me to visit her grave and gave me a note with the cemetery's address. I told her I would, but I was lying. I told her that I would to give her some peace, but I also said that Yuki was a distant memory now and to not come here again. I had work and a new life to focus on. I felt bad for her, but I was creeped out and threw away the note immediately. I did love Yuki at one point, but by that time I had a new girlfriend. Anyway, just to be safe, I moved again. I didn't want her showing up again. My girlfriend at the time, let's call her Ami, and I worked together. She was a receptionist and I was in sales, so it wasn't unusual for me to get home after 10 p.m. Ami would sometimes come over, cook dinner, and stay the night when we had the next day off. About a year after Yuki's sister showed up, maybe less, it was summer, I came home exhausted, and Ami had made dinner and was waiting for me. After taking a bath, I sat down to drink beer and looked at her, but something seemed off. It was like I was seeing two of her. I thought it was just because I wasn't wearing my glasses as I'm nearsighted, but something was different. It looked like a figure the same size as Ami was moving in and out like when you're trying to focus on someone when taking a picture. I put on my glasses, but I still saw it. Ami doesn't believe in anything supernatural, so I couldn't exactly tell her that I saw a figure of a woman hovering around her. So she just gave me a puzzled look because of the way I was staring at her. The woman overlapping with her wasn't her. It was a face I didn't quite recognize. Since the room was brightly lit and Ami was acting normal, I wasn't scared. It was just really creepy and weird. I figured it was a hallucination from working too hard. Nothing major, and anyway, it disappeared after about 30 seconds. The real problem started about 6 months later. Ami was staying over again and we were asleep. It was around 2 a.m, though I can't be exactly sure since I'd been drinking, but Ami suddenly woke me up. I looked at her and noticed something was wrong with her head. From my perspective, her right side, my left, was bigger than usual. When I focused on it, I saw the same woman slowly emerging from her head. She was about 30 centimeters away from me, grinning at me. And then she started eating Ami's head. At least that's what it looked like to me. Her head wasn't actually being eaten, of course, but the woman kept staring at me while biting into her head and slowly sinking back into it. I can't describe it well, but imagine the woman's head repeatedly diving in and out of Ami's head. Every time she bit into her head, Ami would squeeze her eyes shut in pain and groaned that she had a really bad headache. I could see and hear everything, but I was paralyzed and couldn't move a muscle. Eventually, the woman gave me one last huge, creepy grin before disappearing back into Ami's head. It was at that moment that I realized the woman was Yuki's sister. I had only met her that one time and didn't get a good look at her face. Back when she visited, I couldn't bring myself to stare directly at her, and so I didn't recognize the face I saw when she first appeared to double with Ami 6 months ago. I'm pretty certain it was her Ikiryo, or her living spirit. That's the only explanation that makes sense to me. After that night, Ami started suffering from severe migraines. The only possible explanation was that Yuki's sister's Ikiryo was literally making my girlfriend sick. And from then on, Yuki's sister appeared whenever I was with Ami. Whether she'd just come out of the bath or the toilet, or even when we were out together, she'd suddenly show up. One time, as we were about to kiss, Ami's face turned into Yuki's sister's face, and I couldn't help but jump back. As you can guess from reading all this, I'm a bit of a jerk and a coward, so I had to break up with Ami because I couldn't take it anymore. It didn't help though. Yuki's sister still appeared about once every 3 to 4 days. It was terrifying not knowing when she'd appear. I became scared of looking in the mirror, scared to pull the curtains when I got home, because sometimes I'd see her reflection in the window, and I couldn't sleep with the lights off. My electricity bill shot up to almost 10,000 yen a month. There was only one thing I could do: track down the sister. I thought that maybe if I begged for forgiveness, things would stop, but I didn't know her name or contact information, so I went back to my old job and asked around, but all my old co-workers had transferred elsewhere, so that was a dead end. Next, I turned to psychics. Those people are even worse scumbags than myself. At first, they'd help for a price between 10,000 to 30,000 yen, or $70 to $210, but soon they start pushing full-scale exorcisms costing hundreds of thousands of yen. And the worst part? You guessed it, none of it worked. As a last-ditch effort, I went to the hospital. I should have started there from the beginning. I was prescribed Abilify at first, then Zyprexa, which are both antipsychotic drugs. Thanks to that, I'm feeling much better now. I hardly see Yuki's sister anymore. Quitting my job and moving back in with my parents probably helped too. I told them I was dealing with depression due to work stress, and now I'm working part-time at a convenience store. I'm in my 30s and dealing with this illness, so I doubt I'll ever have a proper job again. There's no real conclusion to this story, but that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for sticking with me. This is going to be pretty long, so apologies in advance, but I'm writing this while drunk. It's one of those stories I end up telling new friends and younger folks every summer. I have an older brother who's really sensitive to spirits, and he's had tons of weird experiences, but this story in particular caused some serious trouble for all of us. We can laugh about it now, but at the time, it was terrifying. Back when I was in middle school, my brother was a bit of a delinquent and was attending a notoriously bad high school in the city. Every night, he'd steal our parents' car and go out visiting haunted spots. He would use those scary haunted maps you find in bookstores or convenience stores and visit every place listed. I'd often hear his spooky stories afterward and find them pretty entertaining. But after a while, strange things started happening at home. Once when my brother's girlfriend at the time, who claimed she was also sensitive to spirits, came over. As soon as she stepped inside, she said, "This place feels creepy," and promptly left. Another time, our dog, which usually wags its tail and is full of excitement whenever my brother takes it for a walk, suddenly froze, ran away from my brother, and hid behind furniture. I also heard someone yelling out from the living room when I was in my room, only to find out that no one had actually called me. This happened more than a couple of times. There are so many occurrences like poltergeists, mysterious footsteps, and the like, but I'll leave those out for now. So anyway, we all started to feel like something was off, but it quickly escalated to the point where we realized that whatever was going on in our home was bad. Phenomenon 1. My brother's room was on the first floor with a window facing the parking space and the front door just to the right when you stepped out of it. One evening, my brother and I were playing video games in his room with our backs to the window when our mum came home from work. She parked in the driveway and came straight to our room asking, "What was that about?" We were confused, so we asked her what she meant, and she said, "There was a guy with long hair wearing white clothes knocking on my car window, gesturing to me." My brother was the only one in the house with long hair at the time. This was during the Takuya Kimura craze, so she assumed it was him and didn't think much of it. But he had been sitting right there with me, playing video games, wearing a red t-shirt. There was no way she could have mistaken him for someone else. Phenomenon 2. My brother was hanging out at a friend's house with 3 or 4 of his male friends. As they entered the house, his friend's mum was cleaning near the entrance. They went to hang out in the room, and a little while later, the mum came in with snacks and drinks. She asked, "Where did the girl go? Did she leave already?" Apparently, after the guys had gone inside, there had been a cute girl standing near the entrance. The mum had thought it was odd to see a girl hanging out with all these guys, so she asked her whether she was coming in. The girl just bowed politely, but by the time the mum noticed again, she was gone. She thought the girl was well-mannered for a friend of theirs. But the thing is, there wasn't any girl with them that night. Phenomenon 3. This happened when my grandmother was staying over. I woke up one morning to find the house in a frenzy. My brother was in a mild panic. When I asked what happened, he told me the following. In the middle of the night, my brother suddenly woke up. He lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark, when suddenly, bang! Something shattered and pieces of something fell on his face. My brother thought the light bulb above him had exploded, so he jumped up and tried to turn on the lights, but nothing happened. In a panic, he ran to the room where our mom and grandma were sleeping, and they had apparently stayed up until morning. When the sun came up, they found that the breaker from my brother's room had tripped. When they checked the lamp, which was an industrial type one from our dad's office, the power cable was cut clean in half, and the bulb wasn't broken at all. Our family was seriously freaked out at this point. Even Mum started leaving the bathroom door open when she used it, and that led to some other unpleasant experiences. We decided soon after that we needed to take some kind of action. Back then, we didn't have internet at home, so we asked our dad to search for exorcism methods online at his office. As he was printing out some exorcism rituals at work, another strange thing happened. Maybe the printer just got jammed, but the printer kept on printing the same pages and wouldn't stop. Dad, who already believes in the paranormal, felt like it had something to do with all the creepy stuff happening at home. All of his co-workers got freaked out and they decided to close the office early. As they were all getting ready to leave, they heard a vibration sound coming from the window. The blinds were shaking for no apparent reason. One man went to touch the blinds and the vibrations stopped, but as soon as he let go, it started up again. Everyone ran out of there. We tried various methods that my dad printed out, but none of them worked. Now, we had no choice but to seek professional help. We went to the biggest shrine in the area to ask for a purification ceremony. When we explained the situation to the receptionist, she offered 2 options, a 5,000 yen or a $35 course, or a 10,000 yen or $70 course. At this point, we were already feeling skeptical and chose the cheaper option. A shrine maiden led us to the back where there was an altar and a curtain hanging from the ceiling, something that looked like a stage that you might see at school theaters. We waited for about 30 minutes until the priest and 2 shrine maidens finally came out and began the ritual. The priest chanted and the shrine maidens waved around a small sword and a stick with white paper attached, performing a dance. In all honesty, my brother and I found it hilarious and had to fight back our laughter as they danced around the stage. A few minutes into it, we noticed flashes through the gap in the curtain on the far side of the stage. No one was supposed to be back there, and I figured it was just part of the ceremony. We felt drained when it was over and hoped that things had calmed down, but not long after we got home, my brother said, "Hey, did you hear that? Someone's walking around upstairs." We all went up to check, but no one was there. And then we began hearing voices from downstairs. We crept down to find my brother's TV had turned on by itself. Things hadn't gotten better. They'd in fact gotten worse. We gathered in the living room, trying to figure out what to do next. My mum pulled out the yellow pages and started looking up more solutions. Since the shrine hadn't worked, she decided to call a monk who specialized in exorcisms. After making a few calls, she finally found a place that could help. The monk offered to come to our house. A couple of hours later, the monk, whose name I think was Yamada, arrived. Without any prior information, he went straight to my brother's room and said, "It's this room, isn't it? There's a young girl here and 2 male spirits coming and going. The girl was here first and then the men showed up later. Once one spirit comes, others tend to follow." We were amazed. He was the real deal. He started preparing for the exorcism. We cleared the room and he set up a small altar in the middle. He had us all sit in a line with our backs to the window. The monk began chanting sutras. After about 5 minutes, I noticed my brother leaning heavily towards Mum. I whispered, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he replied that something was pulling at him with great force. Mum then said that someone was touching her foot. The chanting continued, and soon the monk called each of us to the altar, one by one. We knelt in front of him, and he pressed a staff with metal rings onto our backs. It was a mixture of pain and getting tickled. Maybe close to what it feels like when your leg goes numb and your blood starts to rush back in. Anyway, with that, the exorcism was over. The monk told us that the spirit took a liking to my brother and decided to follow him because he looks kind. He then turned to my brother and asked whether he'd been to any haunted places recently. He admitted that he'd been to several places like that, so didn't know where he could have picked this spirit up. The monk nodded and gave us some stories from his past exorcisms and explained what happens to places where people have died. Finally, he gave us protective talismans to hang on the east, west, south, and north walls of our house. The strange phenomena stopped after this, and life went back to normal. My brother stopped going to haunted places altogether, but he still has weird experiences quite frequently. Also, I feel like the protective talismans have started losing their effect now, because things have started happening at home again. Honestly though, my brother and I have gotten used to it and don't really mind anymore, and Mum doesn't even notice. By the way, I later saw that monk on a local late-night TV show about paranormal activities. I guess some of these spiritual mediums that appear on TV are actually real. Who knew? Anyway, that's the end of this story. And yes, it's all true.